We want to take a personal look at Pope Leo XIV, who is now the spiritual father to around 1.4 billion Catholics around the world. Pope Leo XIV, revered for his calm diplomacy and spiritual depth, as we heard in the Gospel reading, in a gesture of closeness, Jesus took the man aside and healed him with his words and his touch, has just triggered a media firestorm after a startling moment with Queen Camilla during a closely watched Vatican meeting. As the Queen extended her hand in a gesture of mutual respect, the Pope's unexpected refusal sent shockwaves through the room, but what followed next left even the most seasoned observers in disbelief. Royal protocol shattered. Global headlines ignited. Was this a quiet protest or a calculated message? Stick around as we unpack the moment, now rattling both Rome and royalty. The day Camilla met Leo XIV, God never gives up on us. He is always ready to accept us, to give meaning and hope to our lives. Yet sometimes, those who carry his message deliver it in ways no one could predict. And that's exactly what happened when Queen Camilla met Pope Leo XIV. For centuries, every royal visit to the Vatican has been a tightly choreographed dance. The British royal family attended a traditional Christmas Day church service at one of the Queen's country estates. From the angle of a bow to the placement of a chair, each movement carries centuries of symbolism. Diplomats read the room like scholars read ancient texts. Theologians linger on a smile or a pause. And the moment the Queen of the United Kingdom steps inside Vatican City, the world isn't just watching, it's interpreting history in real time. But this meeting refused to follow the usual script. Pope Leo XIV, born Robert Francis Provost on September 14, 1950, long before his election, he was a Franciscan friar working in refugee camps, traversing harsh landscapes in sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East, sometimes on horseback, simply to reach remote communities. In Peru's valleys of Lambayeque, he was known for sleeping in modest quarters and serving meals with his own hands to those who had none. When his predecessor died unexpectedly, many cardinals expected a traditionalist to take the helm. Instead, the world got Leo XIV, a man who believes tradition matters, but humanity matters more. He is the first American to hold the papacy, though some see him as deeply Latin American in spirit, shaped by his decades as a missionary in Peru. From the beginning, his papacy has been defined by presence, showing up where pain hides, listening where voices are ignored. Though media reports suggested he would live in the papal apartments of the Apostolic Palace, his humility and accessibility have remained unchanged. So when Queen Camilla extended her hand in a gesture meant to honor centuries of royal Vatican decorum, the world expected the familiar handshake, a polite smile, and a photograph to be filed under protocol. Instead, Pope Leo XIV quietly declined the gesture. It wasn't an act of hostility. Those who know him say it was something deeper, a reminder that his mission has never been about outward appearances. But if refusing the handshake caught the room off guard, what happened next left it in stunned silence. Cameras captured the moment, but no one could quite agree on what they'd just seen. Was it a symbolic statement, a personal conviction, or a subtle message that tradition should bend when humanity calls? Behind closed doors, the royal household and Vatican aides are said to be treading carefully. The public, meanwhile, is left with a moment that defies easy explanation. A meeting where a centuries-old ceremony collided with a man determined to follow his own compass. And now, the question lingers. Was this simply the Pope being himself, or the beginning of a new chapter in how faith meets royalty? But what was that unexpected gesture that stunned everyone in the room? Stay glued to your screen to find out. A gesture no one saw coming. The hush in the room was unnerving. The kind of silence that makes your heartbeat feel too loud. This wasn't just another royal engagement, and it certainly wasn't a routine Vatican courtesy call. Something was unfolding, and every eye in the Apostolic Palace knew it. The marble walls had seen centuries of diplomacy and power. But on that day in April 2024, It bore witness to a moment far more vulnerable than political. Standing in the glow of gold candelabras, Pope Leo XIV, known for his stillness, his deep, unreadable eyes, made headlines, not for what he said, but for what he didn't do. Queen Camilla, dressed in a refined cream ensemble with her signature poise, had extended her hand for a polite greeting. The cameras were in place, advisors ready to whisper cues, yet the Pope merely looked at her hand and didn't move. It wasn't a snub, at least not in the conventional sense. It was a deliberate pause, one that stretched long enough to draw the breath from the room. A single photographer dropped his lens cap, and the soft clatter echoed like a warning bell. But it was what followed that turned a headline into history. With his sleeves already rolled up, Pope Leo walked to a simple silver basin set at the center of the room. It was not ornamental. Its presence was puzzling, understated, and ancient. Camilla, unsure but composed, watched silently as he poured water from a clay pitcher into the bowl. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice calm, "I did not come to pose for photographs." The Queen glanced at her advisors, who looked equally unsettled. This was not part of the protocol. She had been prepared for speeches, smiles, and ceremonial blessings, but this was unscripted. "I came," the Pope continued, "to offer something older than cameras, older than thrones." No one knew where to look. The Vatican officials stiffened, aides held their breath. Still, the Queen did not retreat. Camilla, the woman who had spent decades navigating the labyrinth of royal expectations, simply nodded. The Pope gestured toward the water. "If you're willing," he said, "join me in a ritual that speaks not of crowns, but of service." The weight of centuries hung between them. Queen Camilla took a tentative step forward. "This wasn't what I expected," she murmured, her voice steadier than she felt. "No," the Pope replied gently, "but it may be what we need." What followed was quiet, yet louder than any speech either could have given. The Pope dipped his hands into the basin, the water rippling with the echo of history. He made no grand statement, only moved with the kind of calm that unsettles you more than thunder. Then astonishingly, he reached for a towel and offered his hands to the Queen. Camilla hesitated just for a second. Then gracefully, she took the towel and dried his hands. The cameras kept rolling, but no one was performing. There were no dramatic pauses or well-timed glances, only presence, only reverence. When she was done, the Pope took her hands in turn and washed them with the same solemn care. Those were the hands that had gripped microphones during royal speeches, waved to crowds, held royal airs, and clasped Charles's during coronation. Now they were bare, wet, and resting in the hands of a man who had, without saying it, invited her to shed everything symbolic and meet him as equals. It was disarming, strangely intimate. A journalist later described it as the most honest moment I've ever captured through a lens. And when it ended, no one clapped, no one dared. The Pope looked up and signaled quietly. "Let the press fully re-enter," he told an aide. He then turned to the cameras, his voice clear but soft. "We may speak." Camilla stood beside him, not as a queen parading royal diplomacy, but as a woman who had just experienced something deeply personal, yet profoundly public. Her posture had changed, ever so slightly, not smaller, not humbler, but quieter, warmer, real. Some have speculated that the moment was staged, a new Vatican gesture, meant to shock or soften. Others argue it was a rebuke of the monarchy itself. But perhaps, as one theologian whispered later, it was simply two leaders daring to do something that mattered. Whatever it was, that quiet ritual between Pope Leo XIV and Queen Camilla has left both church and crown facing questions far beyond ceremony. Was this a sign of deeper alliances forming, or quiet tensions finally showing their face? Whatever the answer, one thing is certain: the world watched, and it will not soon forget. But what was the Pope's silent message to Queen Camilla that stunned the world? Stay glued to your screen to find out. The Pope's silent message to Queen Camilla shocks the world. The Vatican press room had seen its share of drama. Fiery exchanges, historic declarations, thunderous applause. But on that cool spring morning in 2025, something else gripped the room: stillness. It wasn't fear, nor reverence, but confusion, wrapped in anticipation. The usual scramble of cameras and questions fell into a strange rhythm, as though everyone sensed they were witnessing something that didn't fit the script. The scene had unfolded just moments earlier. Queen Camilla, ever poised and precise, extended her hand toward Pope Leo XIV during a high-profile audience. What followed was not the polite clasp expected between two seasoned figures of diplomacy. Instead, the Pope simply looked at her hand and let the moment pass. Was it an snub disguised as solemnity, or something deeper than modern protocol? No one moved or spoke. Even Camilla, known for her iron grace, stood quietly, her expression unreadable, a mix of surprise and something harder to name. A French reporter broke the silence. "Your Holiness, was this a rejection of the Queen's gesture?" Pope Leo answered firmly, "No, it was a decision. In a world full of staged gestures, true respect sometimes means breaking routine. I did not refuse her. I invited her to reflect." A hush filled the room. Camilla didn't recoil. Instead, she seemed steadier. "I was surprised," she said, "but not offended. Protocol is easy. Perspective is rare." A Reuters journalist then asked, "Was this staged? A symbolic move for the cameras?" The Pope smiled faintly. "If it were planned, it would be empty. It was real, and real things make us uncomfortable." Camilla nodded slowly. "There's a difference between being caught off guard and being invited into discomfort. Today I was invited, and I accepted." That subtle moment rippled outward like a stone in still water. From her residence at Clarence House, Camilla watched the broadcast live. No aides whispering strategy, no official statements, just her, quietly absorbing it all. Camilla has long navigated tradition and transformation, carrying public opinion, family duty and royal expectation. But few see how she does it. Without spectacle, without theatrics. Like Pope Leo, she values restraint in the power of silence. When asked why he placed a bowl of water between them, the Pope replied simply, "Because water humbles. It unites. It is the beginning of all things. If we cannot stand at the same basin, how can we lead from the same well?" Camilla didn't flinch. She looked down at her hands and said quietly, "I didn't expect to be humbled today. But maybe that's the point." One final question came from the back. "Your Majesty, would you go through it again?" "Yes," she answered. "Not because it was easy, because it mattered." The Pope nodded. True transformation begins where comfort ends. Within hours, the clip had gone viral, not because of a scandal, but because of the eerie sincerity. This wasn't a political snub or a religious rift. It was something more haunting. A confrontation not between two people, but between symbolism and truth. And in that quiet confrontation, two unlikely figures reminded the world that sometimes the loudest messages are spoken without words at all. But what silent message did Camilla and the Pope's meeting send? That changed everything. Stay with us to find out. Camilla and the Pope, a meeting that changed everything. Some said Queen Camilla should have kept her distance. The Vatican had been at the center of headlines recently, and the whispers in palace corridors questioned whether aligning herself so publicly with its initiatives was worth the risk. But behind closed doors, Prince William was urging her to reconsider. His passion for environmental causes had only deepened over the years, and he saw the Pope's invitation not as a political trap, but as an opportunity. Faith leaders, he believed, could carry a message about protecting the planet further than politics ever could. Camilla, after days of thought, gave a short, clear answer. She would go, not as a token guest, but as a full participant in a mission to unite faith communities for the good of the earth. Weeks later, her car rolled quietly into Assisi, the birthplace of Saint Francis. Francis, the saint who saw every creature as family. The narrow streets hummed with anticipation. Religious leaders had come from all over the world, robes and collars mingling with bright scarves and humble sandals. This wasn't Rome, with its marble halls and stiff protocol. Here the air smelled of olive trees and incense. As she stepped out, there was no gilded fanfare, just a handful of Franciscan friars, waiting with smiles that reached their eyes. She wore a simple navy dress, the kind that suggested she had come to work, not to be admired. At the basilica's entrance stood Pope Leo XIV. Weeks earlier, during a high-profile meeting in Rome, their first encounter had made headlines for reasons neither of them had expected. But now, as she approached, something shifted. The Pope's expression softened. His smile was warm, extending both hands in a traditional Christian blessing. He quietly said, "Welcome, Camilla." She reached forward, lightly touching his hands, a gesture so natural it almost went unnoticed, though the cameras caught it all. Inside, the scene was unlike any royal or papal event. Rabbis sat beside imams, Buddhist monks chatted with Anglican bishops, teenage climate activists from Brazil, Ghana and India compared notes on their projects. The energy was one of shared purpose, not ceremonial display. When Camilla spoke, her words were not grand proclamations, but gentle reflections. She told the story of a London school garden, where a child once told her that watching plants grow is like seeing the ground smile. The room, so diverse in belief, seemed to lean in. Then came the surprise. Pope Leo rose and invited her to stand beside him for the summit's opening prayer. It hadn't been planned. Even Vatican aides looked startled. Handing her a sheet of paper in English, he began reading in unison with her. Two voices, one prayer echoing through the ancient stone walls. A moment that was less about religion or royalty and more about unity. 2 days later, the Vatican and Camilla released a joint declaration urging nations to protect green spaces, invest in children's environmental education, and encourage cooperation between faiths on climate issues. But perhaps the real turning point wasn't in any signed document or public speech. It was in the quiet exchanges, away from cameras, moments where a queen and a pope, both navigating worlds of tradition and scrutiny, found in each other a shared commitment to something far greater than either crown or cross. But what made Camilla and the Pope's silent exchange stun journalists inside the Vatican's Grand Hall? Stay glued to your screen. Journalists stunned by Camilla and the Pope's powerful silent exchange. Inside the echoing corridors of the Vatican's Grand Hall, something unusual happened. Something no one expected from a day that began like any other royal religious encounter. Queen Camilla, poised in her signature elegance, had come for a symbolic meeting with Pope Leo. Cameras were ready, microphones positioned, but the moment wasn't hijacked by media frenzy. Instead, it was claimed by silence, not the cold kind, but the type that draws everyone inward, even the press, hardened by years of staged speeches and photo ops, fell still. A BBC correspondent, usually sharp and fast, finally asked the question that had everyone holding their breath. "Your Holiness, are your actions today a risk to the balance between faith and politics?" The Pope didn't hesitate, his hands folded, his voice firm, but calm. "Faith is not a performance," he said, "and service is not theater." He looked toward Camilla, not just as a queen, but as a woman who'd just done something rare, offered vulnerability, not authority. Though no official words had been exchanged at that moment, her gesture had sparked what some were already calling the kneeling that changed everything. Camilla had not bowed to religious protocol, but rather to something deeper, and in doing so, she shifted the room's entire energy. Another journalist stood, addressing her directly. "Your Majesty, was this encounter a challenge to your place in power?" Camilla didn't rush her answer. Her expression wasn't defensive. It was thoughtful, grounded. "It wasn't about power," she said softly. "It was a test, yes, but of presence, not position. And I chose to be present, not perform." The Pope nodded. "The world is exhausted by spectacle," he added. "People crave something real. Truth doesn't wear crowns, it kneels." That line stirred the room. Reporters who had come for a headline now found themselves taking notes on something that felt more like a sermon than a soundbite. And Camilla, often portrayed as a symbol of polished protocol, began to reveal something else entirely. A woman who, in her own words,
learned that strength without surrender is just fear in disguise. No declarations, no grand gestures, just honesty. When the meeting ended, there were no cheers, only a hush, and maybe, for the first time, respect instead of curiosity. But what really happened? When Camilla and the Pope changed the room, stay glued to your screen to find out. The day Camilla and the Pope changed the room, a hush had fallen over the apostolic palace. Long before the world caught wind of the grand corridors, usually alive with ceremonial bustle, seemed to hold their breath that day. When Queen Camilla entered the chamber to meet Pope Leo XIV, many expected a polite exchange, handshakes, smiles, perhaps a few carefully chosen words for the camera. But what unfolded was far from ordinary. The Pope's refusal to take Camilla's hand was brief, yet seismic, sending ripples through the audience and igniting whispers across continents. Cameras captured the surprising moment, but what happened next remained hidden from public view. As aides moved to escort them through separate exits, the Pope suddenly gestured toward a quiet side corridor. Without a word, he gently guided Camilla away from the grand hall, leading her down a narrow, dimly lit passage. They arrived at a small private chapel, where the only light came from a single flickering candle, beneath a plain wooden crucifix. There was no gold, no marble, no grandeur, only a profound stillness. Camilla hesitated at the threshold, clearly unused to such raw, unguarded moments. "I wasn't ready for this," she whispered. The Pope knelt at the front pew and replied softly, "No one ever is." She stood quietly behind him, her voice low. "I thought I'd be in control," he answered calmly. "You still are. But what kind of control do you truly want?" The question lingered in the air, weightier than any royal crown. For years Camilla had spoken of service, of change, and of giving voice to the unheard. Yet here, in this quiet space, she realized she had spent much time trying to control the world outside without letting it change her inside. From his sleeve, the Pope pulled out a small, hand-carved olive wood rosary. "This was given to me by a woman in Palestine," he said gently. "A mother who lost 3 sons in conflict. She had almost nothing left, but she still shared her faith." Placing the rosary in Camilla's hand, he added, "This isn't just a gift. It's a reminder of what you already know." She glanced down, whispering, "I don't even know how to pray." The Pope smiled warmly. "You just did." She laughed quietly, caught between discomfort and wonder. "You surprised me, Pope Leo, and you surprised me," he replied. "Most run from the unexpected. You stepped into it." Then his tone shifted. "Curious, why did you stay after I refused your handshake? Why not leave?" Camilla thought for a moment. It didn't feel like rejection. It felt like a challenge. "I didn't want to fail," he nodded slowly. "And you didn't." Outside, journalists speculated endlessly. But in that chapel, there were no titles, no cameras, no scripted speeches, just 2 people sharing humility. When they finally emerged, the air in the hall seemed different. Reporters lowered their voices instinctively. "Will you release a statement?" one called out. Camilla glanced at the Pope, then back at the crowd. "No," she said simply. "Because for once, words aren't enough." The Pope lifted his hand in acknowledgement, then to everyone's astonishment, extended it toward Camilla. This time she accepted. The handshake was met not with a roar of noise, but a deep resonant silence, followed by applause that felt almost reverent. It wasn't the handshake of politics, it was the handshake of recognition. Some later called it unprecedented. A cardinal was overheard saying, "That was unexpected." The Pope only smiled. So was crowd. And just like that, the moment belonged not to the Vatican or the crown, but to something quieter, something that could not be staged. In a world obsessed with spectacle, Queen Camilla had shown a different kind of leadership, steady, unassuming, and deeply human. So what do you think drove Pope Leo XIV to refuse Camilla's handshake? Before shocking everyone with his next move, we'd like to hear your thoughts. But don't forget to stay tuned.